Good evening and welcome back to uh, what has become the regularly scheduled Mahayana Lojong in 7 points for Urban Dharma North Carolina's Open Sangha program. Since the pandemic, this is the topic that we have been looking at every Thursday. Welcome back. Good to see all of you, both on Zoom as well as on Facebook. Just a reminder to everyone, all the previous parts of this program, they are all archived in the Drikung Dharma Kirti Circle YouTube channel. Drikung Dharma Kirti Circle YouTube channel. So you can always go there to look for the earlier parts. And then every Thursday, sometime after our program, once the video becomes available, we will upload it there. Let us start this evening's program with the opening recitations. The opening recitations, there are 4 different recitations that we do. As you listen to the recitation, if you don't have the text, it's okay. It's not necessary, that everybody says it. More important is you listen to the words and let the meaning of those words kind of sink into your heart. Kind of let it absorb into your heart, into your mind. Then, of course, words that you are not clear about, it's okay. Don't get stuck. Don't get fixated on them. Slowly, some of these terms will be explained, will be expanded on. And then over time, your understanding of the meaning of these words will grow. Much better than, giving you too much, kind of intellectual stuff, right, that you just kind of file away and say, oh, I know that, I know that, I know that, I know that. Can get very addictive sometimes, So I want to emphasize more the importance of really trying to fold that, into our hearts. So I'm going to begin with the recitations. If you know how to do it, of course, you can join me. If you don't, just listen, and that's how you're going to join. All mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all-knowingness, may they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly establish them in the state of the most perfect and precious awakening. All mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all-knowingness, may they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly establish them in the state of the most perfect and precious awakening. All mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all-knowingness, may they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly establish them in the state of the most perfect and precious awakening. Thus, until I achieve awakening, I engage in virtuous deeds, with body, speech, and mind. Until death, I engage in virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From now until this time tomorrow, I engage in virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, most excellent, I take refuge until awakening is reached. By the merit of generosity and other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all migratory beings. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, most excellent, I take refuge until awakening is reached. By the merit of generosity and other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all migratory beings. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, most excellent, I take refuge until awakening is reached. By the merit of generosity and other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all migratory beings. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, limitless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. I invite you to give yourself this time, to set aside this time as a time for skillful self-care, developing the skills that are necessary for meaningful self-care. We necessarily have to start with the self, even if from the ultimate level, with the light of wisdom shining upon this so-called self, we shall see that the self is not something solid. And at most, what it is a process of self-making that occurs from moment to moment, and therefore fluid, therefore dynamic, therefore also impermanent and essenceless. Even if on the ultimate level, when the wisdom light is shined upon this so-called self, we see the essencelessness of self. Nonetheless, on the conventional level, at the level of where we are and where we experience happiness and suffering, there is this self that we have to begin with. So first we have to learn the skillful way of caring for the self, of safeguarding our own heart. But in this tradition, in the Mahayana Lojong tradition, we say that we train in self-care not as an end unto itself, but rather self-care, skillful self-care, becomes the basis for the ability to care for all others. So that eventually the focus shifts from the self to others. So that the focus eventually will shift from self-cherishing to other cherishing. But nonetheless, we begin with the self. In order to reorientate ourselves so that we can stay the course and traverse this path to liberation, this path to the state of Buddha, of being awake, we need to turn away from distractions. We need to make the resolve to want to turn away from distractions. And therefore, in the Lojong tradition, and particularly in this text called Mahayana Lojong in 7 points, composed by Geshe Chekawa, the first point, it says, we first train in the preliminaries. We first train in the foundational matters. So in the training in the foundational matters, what is often given is called the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. The 4 considerations to help us reorientate our lives and our focus and our values and our commitments, so that we are committed to the work of waking up. We are committed to the work of jailbreaking from this prison of confusion and dissatisfaction, so that we see through all the tricks and all the distractions that we habitually get caught up in, so that we turn our hearts away from distraction. We turn our hearts away from even trying to give confused existence a makeover, a fresh coat of paint, a rearranging of the deck chairs on this Titanic of confused existence. We turn away from all of that. So these are called the 4 considerations or the 4 thoughts that turn the mind away from distractions. The first consideration is to consider the fact that although we now have this human existence with all that it is affording us, especially in terms of how our current situation affords us, gives us the possibility, gives us the leisure, gives us the possibilities and leisures to practice the path to freedom. Consider how rare and how non-repeatable this probably is going to be. And so with this consideration, we can also decide, I have no need to wallow in the mud of self-pity. I have no time for that. With this consideration, I also don't need to compare myself to my neighbors or my cousins that are more wealthy, more beautiful, more successful, more rooms, more vehicles, and more and more. But without an interest in being free from this prison. So in comparison, we see how now our life have become meaningful because we have met the Dharma. We have been given the path to freedom. And so great joy should arise. With this consideration, we also make the resolve that we are not going to waste our time and our energy in meaningless things that we often find ourselves in. From here, we go to the next consideration, which is to consider how there is no time to waste. For many of us, the time that we have in front of us is less than the time that we have behind us. If not now, then when? Now is the time. Death is a certainty. When it will occur is uncertain. Death is something that we all have to experience because there is birth, there is death. Although death is something that we all have to experience, there is still a difference between, are we going to greet death whole and complete, or are we going to meet death broken and in pieces? Now is the time to begin the path to wholeness, to completeness, so that when death comes, we will leave whole and complete rather than broken, rather than in pieces. May we die joyfully and happily in the great luminosity of the nature of mind having been recognized. Consider that the suffering, the dissatisfaction, the unhappiness that we experience is the result of having engaged in, having created unskillful actions of body, speech, and mind. And recognize how happiness comes from having created the causes of goodness. This has nothing to do with belief or religion. This is just the way, the natural way that things are. If we plant an apple seed, we get an apple tree. If we plant a mango seed, we get a mango tree. No one is punishing us. No one is rewarding us. No one is judging us for being good or bad, acceptable, not acceptable, lovable, not lovable. Cause and effect. The incontrovertible workings of cause and effect, whereby unskillful actions driven by the afflictive emotions, the three poisons, inevitably gives rise to dissatisfaction and suffering. On the other hand, any and all actions that come from the roots of virtue, from Bodhicitta, they bear fruit again and again in the fruit of happiness. So with this third consideration, we begin to appreciate the wonderful opportunity that we have to transform our experience by carefully observing, is this virtue or is this non-virtue? What do I want? How should I act? So that we know what to adopt and what to abandon. So that we know what to take to heart and what to leave alone. Instead of habitually getting caught up by our emotions, being dragged around by our emotions. Now we see clearly the causes of suffering and the necessity to abandon the causes of suffering and the causes of happiness and the reasons and the beauty of creating those causes. And finally, the fourth consideration is to consider how all of confused existence, all of samsara, also called cyclic existence, they all entail dissatisfaction. They all entail suffering. They are all unstable, constantly changing. Therefore, do not seek ultimate happiness from any state of confused existence. As long as we are in any of these confused states of existence, even in the higher states, the so-called God realms or the divine realms, know that dissatisfaction and confusion always follows us like a shadow. Sometimes the shadow is clearly visible, sometimes barely visible, but always there. To recognize the samsaric nature of confused existence is not to condemn this world as being worthless. Those are two different things. The world itself is not yet necessarily what we call samsara. Samsara is a mode of being, and therefore samsara is a state of existence that we have created for ourselves. And so what we renounce is not the world per se, but this confused mode of existing, of being, of becoming. So make that resolve that in all of samsara, and if you know the 6 realms of existence in samsara, recognize the faults of each of these realms, and therefore make the resolve to commit ourselves to the path to awakening. In this context, to commit ourselves to the second point of the 7-point Lojong, which is the main point, which is the training in the 2 Bodhicittas. There are 2 aspects or phases of bodhicitta. One side is called absolute bodhicitta, and the other side is called relative bodhicitta. Absolute bodhicitta is the wisdom phase, and relative bodhicitta is the love and compassion phase. And these are 2 sides of the same coin. But on the level of training, since we are in the relative world, then there is a sequence to how to train in these 2 sides of the same coin. In this Mahayana Lojong in 7 points, the approach is to first begin with meditating on absolute bodhicitta. Train first in the wisdom aspect, or at least have a taste of the wisdom aspect before moving on to learn the training in the love and compassion aspect, relative bodhicitta. So in the commentarial tradition for the Mahayana Lojong in 7 points, it is taught that the beginning of this main training in the 2 bodhicittas should start from first disciplining the mind. As Shantideva says, without first disciplining the mind, all the other parts of training becomes impossible and meaningless. So in this tradition, the way to rein in the mind, the way to bring body and mind back to the same place, right here, on this seat, in this room, is to bring your attention to your breath, counting your breath with each inhalation and exhalation. You count 1, then you count 2, then you count 3. And it is recommended that you count up to 21. You can also count, especially in the beginning, in sets of 3 sets of 7s, so that you can count as you inhale 1, then you exhale again 1, then inhale 1, exhale 2, then 1, 3, then 1, 4, 1, 5, all the way to 1, 7, then 2, 1, and 2, 2, and all the way to 7. And then 3-1, all the way to 3-7. Then you have finished one set. Then let your mind kind of rest a little, but maintaining presence. Loosen it up a little bit. Then tighten it again with the reining in and counting. So yes, this entails effort. This is not a relaxation method per se, but when we begin to train to have some control over this monkey mind, in the long term, in the bigger picture, we will experience the fruit of happiness that we're looking for. So I invite you right now, when you are ready at your own pace, to begin counting your breath. As we continue to count our breath in order to establish presence, try to recall the different prompts given for the training in absolute bodhicitta. The first prompt is to help us to understand, to recognize how all phenomena, how all the things that we experience, things that we label as pleasant, pleasing, or painful, or pathetic, all of these, without exception, are projections, are the stuff of dreams. In connection to this period of meditation, the way to apply this first line, this first prompt of regarding all phenomena as dreams, is so that whatever thoughts, whatever strayings that you find your mind drifting off to, don't do anything drastic. Don't do anything to try to stamp it out, but recognize that. Recognize the straying. Recognize the distraction as nothing but the stuff of dreams. See that whatever it is that your mind has gone off chasing is nothing more than your mind's confused projections. And in that way, just let go. Stop the chase. If it is something unpleasant that you suddenly experience during this time of counting your breath, apply this first prompt of seeing how that too is the stuff of dreams, stuff of projection, no reality beyond an ephemeral existence, and therefore cannot harm you if you don't let it harm you. And then relax back into just watching your breath, counting your breath. Let the counting build up stability, presence, calmness, serenity. But the kind of serenity and calmness that is not afraid of movement. The kind of stillness that is spacious enough to allow movement to occur, knowing that whatever movement that occurs are but the stuff of dreams, are but confused projections with no essence, and therefore incapable of doing any true harm unless we don't recognize it. Therefore, regard all phenomena as dreams. The next prompt is to examine the nature of birthless awareness. Our awareness from moment to moment. Initially, it looks like there is a birth moment, followed by an abiding moment, and followed by a cessation or death moment. So from moment to moment, awareness seems to arise, abide, and disappear. Arise, abide, and disappear. Here, this prompt here that says examine the nature of birthless awareness is pointing to the subjective end of experience, whereas the first prompt is to point to the objective end of experience, showing how the objects that we think are real and concrete and truly out there are nothing but projections of our confused mind. The second prompt, examine the nature of birthless awareness, is to help us to see that the existence of the object that is perceived out there is dependent on the existence of the perceiving subject, the moment of awareness, the moment of consciousness. But since the object is said to be unreal, see too how the subject is similarly unreal. Essenceless. But in this birthless, essenceless state of awareness, there is luminosity. There is an appearance aspect that continues, but without any essence. The third prompt, let even the antidote be freed in its own place, is helping us see how even the effort that we apply in training in absolute bodhicitta, the effort to see all phenomena as dreams, the effort to examine the nature of birthless awareness, even that does not stand on its own. The subject, object, and action arises in reliance on each other. And when one of them is seen to be unreal, then the other two are implicated in this false appearance as well. So when these three prompts are taken together, the intention is to free us from being enslaved by our experiences, from being enslaved by our concepts, from being enslaved and put into this prison of samsara. Instead of that, we resolve to be free. Which then brings us to the fourth prompt that says the essence of what we are doing, the essence of the path, the essence of this method is to settle into the basic state, the alaya state, the nature of our minds. So on one hand, having recognized the interdependent nature of every experience, where subject, object, and action are completely interdependent and therefore essenceless, and therefore having no power over us, then we become free. And now we settle into that recognition of that freedom, of the essencelessness, and rest in the basic state, in the ground of all experience. Let mind rest in mind. Nothing to do. nothing to modify. Let mind rest in mind. Let thoughts rest in thoughts. Let distractions settle back into distractions. No problem, no suffering. These prompts are to be applied as we continue to persevere in counting our breath, which is still the main technique of meditating. Then the prompt for the post-meditation session, the post-meditation state is, it says, in between sessions, be a child of magical illusion. recognize that all experiences, whether while we are meditating or when we're off the meditation seat, recognize the illusory nature of all experiences. So with that recognition, we take an illusory break. And then we will come back. A short illusory break so that you can loosen up your illusory, leg pains or, tightness, and maybe get an illusory sip of water or tea. And then we will come back. You can think of some questions if you have, and we will begin when we come back after the break with some answers, some questions, some discussion. Yeah, good. So we're back. So let's see, if we have any questions or discussion. If you are on Zoom, you can ask. That's the advantage of Zoom. If you're shy, you can type in the Zoom chat. If you're watching on Facebook, just type in the comments. And then somebody, maybe Fabiola, can also pay attention over there. She has been helping me with hosting these. And then she will read your question if you type in the comments on Facebook. Don't be so quiet. Share your thoughts, share your experience. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so I started getting really antsy around the time we needed to settle down and be quiet. So my question is, doing something like mudras or prostrations or other things, is that counterproductive?
May or may not be. You have to experiment, but generally speaking, we say it's best to kind of be a little bit tough at times, Again, you have to experiment. Every one of us kind of react to methods differently. But it's good, I think. So instead of me suggesting do this or don't do that, the principle behind that would be, so you see that you're getting antsy, one way is to kind of tighten it, and say, no, stop right now. Because eventually that is the skill we want to arrive at. An ability to say to whatever is coming up, right? Stop. I mean, we want to be able to do that. And you will increase your ability. I mean, it's like, weight training, This is mental weight training. Like yoga, it's very relaxing, but also, can be very sore. I remember when I first started going to yoga, oh my God, this is really tough, But when you begin to kind of stretch, right? Stretch. Of course, if you have a good yoga guide, they will prevent you from hurting yourself in the stretching. And kind of, but it is in the stretching, right, that you develop core kind of power. So same with the mental, yeah. Some days it will cooperate, some days it won't cooperate, So when it won't cooperate, sometimes you just have to tighten it, and say, no, stop. You stop already. We'll play later. You can say that, you know. Or you can also use like absolute bodhicitta to respond to that and see even the antsiness is essenceless and illusory. It may work, it may not work, but you try, you apply that. Because sometimes that's how you get it to stop. You know, sometimes it's actually, you know, when you see the illusory nature, you know, then it just falls away. Sometimes it won't fall away. But I'm not saying that it will always be like this. What I am saying is you try different ways, then what you're doing is you're making it more disciplined. Mm-hmm. And so then you will actually get better and better at not needing to try this, try that to see what works, like, you know, shoot in the sky and see what falls down, you know, but rather you'll be more targeted, you know, and you can say stop and it stops, you know. Then other things, it's like, you know, if it's antsy, if the mind is very antsy, the more you tell it to stop, sometimes the more antsy it becomes, right? Then instead of doing that, you just breathe in and then breathe out, especially breathe out slowly. And breathe out again slowly. And breathe out again slowly. The breathing out slowly, you know, can kind of calm, cool things down.
Right. That's true.
Yeah.
And not eating sugar before meditating is probably a good idea too.
It depends also, you know. My God, I have two sets of God kids, you know. One set of God kids, you know, mom is Taiwanese. No concept in that family. Just like the way I grew up, that sugar gets you all worked up. So mom has no issues with them, you know, eating sweets, you know, 9 p.m. at night. You know, dad is the one, you know, going, no, you're going to get all worked up, you know. And mom would just like, but if you know, you have that kind of reaction, then you have, whether true or not true, you know, your experience is true. So then, yes, avoid.
Right.
Or too much carbs, you know. It's just not a good way to like prepare for, okay, now I'm going to meditate, you know.
Right.
And kaplunk.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Dr. Lai, there's another question.
Yes. Okay.
Do we count to 21 3 times or more than that?
Oh, as many times at your session, you know. Yeah. For your session, yeah, it's up to you. But make that kind of the main thing, the main anchor. Then the prompts for absolute bodhicitta, as appropriate as whatever comes up, you apply those prompts. So last week, you know, when we met, or the last week we didn't directly address Lojong, but the last time we met on this Lojong topic, you know, somebody asked, you know, like right now, you know, all the stuff that is going on. Speaking of COVID-19, at that point, and then since COVID-19, at least in the United States and also many places around the world, another issue has come up. So whatever you think about, the specifics of this or that situation, suffice to say, some very serious things are coming up. So then the question of like, so how do we apply, look at all phenomena as dreamlike, illusory. First of all, I think this is important to repeat. This is not, these teachings are not to say, therefore, act or don't act. Act or don't act, that's something else. And we can have more discussions about, act or don't act, or act this way and don't act that way. That's something else. Here, it's actually giving us a way to first safeguard the heart. And when we have that safeguarding of the heart, then we are in a better position, it is said, to know how to act. Everything that we experience within confused existence is illusory, but the take-home lesson is not, therefore don't do anything. In fact, because it is illusory, then doing all kinds of things is possible. It's a kind of a strange Buddhist logic. The way Buddhist logic on this matter, we say, if something is real, according to the angle that the Buddha takes, if something is real, then it is fixed, then it is stuck. Then it has no possibility of change. Then it renders action meaningless, pointless, because nothing can be done. But because it is not real, because it is illusory, therefore, change is possible. Change that leads to more misery is possible. Change that leads to more happiness is possible. Is happiness illusory? Yeah, of course. Is suffering illusory? Yeah, of course. But as long as we are in this illusion, you better choose one over the other. So it's important to understand the Buddhist understanding of the implications of illusory and the implications of permanence. To us, like in some of the previous Lojong, I said before, the thought of like eternally in heaven, from a Buddhist perspective, that's like terrifying. I kind of joked, right? I said, I can, from the bottom of my heart, answer my door with Jehovah's Witnesses asking me if I want eternal life. From the bottom of my heart say, oh, no, thank you. Because from a Buddhist perspective, that's just terrifying, Eternal life. Oof. I don't know, getting stuck like that. No, thank you, So the Buddhist sense of illusory is very different. The implications of that is, dynamic. Everything can change at any moment. So given that, what's the most skillful way of acting, of being in the world? That's what a Buddha is. So here, today, where I want to go with this is to begin to look at the first prompt for the second part, the bodhicitta, that is said to be relative. If absolute bodhicitta training is training in wisdom or foregrounds wisdom, then relative bodhicitta foregrounds the training in love and compassion. So this is the last 5 lines of the second point of the 7th point. And so if you look at the text, the last 5 lines of the second point of the 7th point begins with train in taking and sending alternately. That means back and forth. You should train in taking and sending or giving, back and forth, back and forth. It says this. The next line, mount these 2 on your breath, is the technique that you use. So for relative bodhicitta training, during meditation, only 2 prompts given. These 2 prompts. For the post-meditation of relative bodhicitta, 3 prompts are given. The last 3 lines. The 3 objects, the 3 poisons, and the 3 roots of virtue. And this kind of keywords to remember. Then in all activities, train by means of the words. And then as for the progressive order of taking, start with oneself. So this is for the post-meditation. But here I want to talk about the meditation part of relative bodhicitta. And so for that, I will take us to the oldest commentary that we have on the Lojong in 7 points by Geshe Chekawa. So there, Geshe Chekawa was one of Geshe Chekawa's students. He, based on the teachings he received from his teacher, then he tells us, this is how you do the relative bodhicitta. So relative bodhicitta is the training in love and compassion, right? So how do we start this love and compassion? So here, this first prompt, the first prompt that says, right, train in taking and sending. What does that mean? It means taking is talking about training in compassion. Sending is talking about training in loving kindness. That's one way to understand this. You want to take away someone's suffering, meaning you want to free them from suffering and the causes of suffering. That is the definition of karuna, what's translated as compassion. Although the English word compassion connotes, suffering along with, right? So someone's suffering, you say, oh, let me join you. That's not the Buddhist definition of karuna. The Buddhist definition of karuna is, I see that you are suffering. I recognize that suffering, and I don't want you to suffer. How can I free you from suffering? How can I help you not suffer? So that desire to free someone from suffering. So that's what we mean when we take. Then when we give, what do we want to give? We want to give happiness to others. Yeah? I want to give happiness. So according to the commentary, in order to train in relative bodhicitta, first we have to train in loving kindness, and we have to train in compassion. So to train in loving kindness and to train in compassion, it says you begin with one person. Make it real. Not, it's easy to say, oh, may all beings have happiness. May they all be free from suffering. Like very general, very kind of, impersonal. Yeah, it's easy to love, and to be kind, to kind of impersonal. So in this, it says, you begin first with someone. And so always recommended here in the tradition is to think of your mother. Elsewhere in the instructions, it also says, the reason that you need to understand the reason why the mother is chosen as the most natural candidate to consider for this, to begin to develop. Because there are certain, you could say, cultural assumptions, but universal too, that we are close to our mothers, and we naturally want to see our mother happy, and we don't want to see our mother suffer. But in the instructions, it does say, like for some people, that karma is not there to think like that about their mothers. So then it says, you choose someone else. So it's not like it's a fundamentalist thing. You have to start with your mother. But they do say, the most natural would be the mother. So you bring this person to mind. You bring your mother to mind. And then you begin by, without trying. If you need to dig around, then you have to find someone else. Right? And what are you digging around? If you have to dig around, oh, how was she kind to me? Let me think. Well, then don't. Because then very likely you're like, I was never loved by her. Poor me. Then it has gone in the wrong direction. So you find someone, if it is not your mother, that you can very easily remember how this person has been kind to you. Without rhyme or reason, they are so kind, so patient. You remember being safe around this person. You remember being taken care of by this person. So first, you need to do that kind of meditation. And the gratitude that arises as you experience, again, you re-experience this person's kindness to you. And when your mind can recall the kindness of this person, the love of this person, the care of this person that you have experienced from this person, when your mind remembers that, recalls that, then in that moment, your mind is radiating loving kindness. In that moment, your mind is radiating loving kindness. So it says, you recognize that she has given me so much benefit and happiness and thus embodied true kindness. The instruction said, reflect thus and cultivate a depth of emotions such that tears fall from your eyes and the hairs of your pores stand on end. Elsewhere in instructions on practicing loving kindness, meditating on loving kindness, it says, and often this is like metta meditation. So I think many of us are familiar with that. So metta, it talks about radiating loving kindness outwards. But actually, before you can radiate anything, In other words, before you can give anyone loving kindness, you first need to experience loving kindness. And so first, you need to cultivate that. And the quickest way, Kyobaji Densam, founder of Drigum Kagyu, he said, if you want to know what this Maitri, what this metta is, he says, it is when, imagine a mother seeing her child playing. When the mother sees her child playing contentedly, happily, that warmth that arises from the mother's heart towards her child, wanting her to be safe and feeling at ease at the same time, and just that happiness, you know. So some people in the past have said, oh, I can see that when I see like puppies playing. Okay, that works too, you know. Puppies, kittens. And when you see that just that warmth, that is the metta we're talking about. Then from there, you begin to kind of recall anyone and everyone that has shown you, showered you, even a small gesture of kindness. You should try to remember. Then you can say, you know, today, you know, where have I witnessed kindness? Where have I witnessed Maitri? Sometimes it is a smile that someone gives you, a stranger from across the room, from across the grocery store. Someone saying to you, no, please, you go first. Someone letting you pass on the highway. Our current modern, you know, society sometimes has become so cynical. Even when someone is acting kindly, we say, we don't recognize that. So here, the teaching is we have to begin to recognize kindness and to cultivate loving kindness. Then, from here, it says, going back to the mother or that person that you have chosen, then you say, you know, this person has done so much for me. And now, I should do what I can to protect her from harm, from misfortune. I just feel I need to help her not experience suffering. So then, I don't want to see her harmed. I don't want to see her suffer. Then we have to think, it is not enough to just protect her from suffering. More importantly, she needs to be protected from the causes of suffering. Because this is still karma, you know. Yeah. So this is not, you know, wanting someone to be free from suffering and completely ignore the fact of karma. So then, at that moment, you think, you know, her suffering and her causes of suffering, I'm willing to take it, you know. I want so much for her to be free from that I'm willing to take it, you know. So how can I cut away? How can I cut this away from her? Take this away from her. In fact, it says it's like layers being sheared off by a sharp knife. All their sufferings, the origin of their suffering, the afflictions, the subtle defilements, everything, you know, you say, just give it to me, give it to me. It says that is the taking aspect. So what we're training directly here is love and compassion. Compassion is the taking away, right, of the suffering. But indirectly, what we are also training here is a brave heart. A brave heart. This brave heart is based on wisdom, not blind bravery, not stupid bravery, not idiot compassion, but a bravery based on. So of course, there's a part of us that says, oh, I don't know, am I able to take their suffering? Yeah. And maybe you're not able to, and that could, kind of put a heavy burden on you. So you also need to have wisdom informing you when you take. And where does that wisdom come from? Where does that bravery come from? Where does that, you could say, toughness comes from? It comes from absolute bodhicitta training. You know it's illusory. You know it's dreamlike. And so that's why in this particular approach, Mahayana Lojong in 7 points, first you train in absolute bodhicitta. Ordinarily, it says you first train in the relative in order to achieve the absolute. Here is a special method that begins first with at least some basic understanding about the way things are, some basic understanding about the nature of reality. Then you work on developing love and compassion, and you work on developing the courage, the bravery, the courage to say, I will take upon myself so that you don't have to suffer. So that's the taking. The giving part is to say, whatever happiness that I have, I can give you. You can take that. Everything you can take. Again, this giving, right? It needs to be informed by wisdom, which is the wisdom that shows us how even all the good stuff that we have, they are essenceless. To try to hoard that up for ourselves will only create suffering. But that in the giving, more will be generated. The more we give, the bigger our hearts can become. So then we give happily, not grudgingly. So basically here, first we train then, in meditating on love and compassion. So let's see, questions, comments for this?
Yeah, there was a question and it's related to this. It says, can you give a concrete example of safeguarding the heart? How to safeguard the heart?
Everything that I just talked about is how you safeguard the heart. Protect the heart from suffering. Protect your mind from suffering. Yeah. Nothing more mysterious than that. Maybe the expression sounds like maybe it's something special. It just means, how to protect yourself from suffering.
Then another, and this is my own question here now. This definition that you gave of suffering from another context is, yes, to suffer with, which makes it
No,
feel
that is
heavier.
that is the
Compassion.
the definition of the English word compassion. The etymology of that is to suffer with. Passion
Yes.
is suffering.
Yes,
Like the
compassion
passion
is
of Christ,
suffering.
suffering of Christ. Compassion, to suffer with, is the actual definition of the English word compassion, which I say is not the Buddhist definition of karuna, when we say train in karuna and train in maitri. Yeah. So your question now, sorry, I interrupted.
No, but my question has to do that because that's the definition that I heard about for compassion for many years. And so
yeah, but
when
that's
I was
not
in,
karuna.
no, that's not karuna. But
Yeah.
thank you for the explanation, because sometimes when we are taught about this Tonglen practices, if karuna is not explained, it feels like a very heavy thing to do.
Yes.
It's important to know what karuna is.
Yes, absolutely. So those of you who have known me longer know that I cringe a little bit when people talk about Tonglen. Because I think it's been, the more I understand this culture that I live in, the more I see that it's a little dangerous to unleash Tonglen upon just about anyone. Because there's a lot of cultural baggage. First of all, as you say, you know, even the basic definition of karuna has been turned into compassion. So to suffer with means go around collecting heaviness. The last time we met, you know, I talked about this, right? And you know, an anecdote, you know, a friend who lived in Thailand, an American friend who lived in Thailand, you know, said that every time he comes back, of course he loved coming back. In many ways, life is a lot easier here. Everything is so spacious, such a big country. You don't feel cramped, you know, you're not up against each other all the time. But on the other hand, he said, you know, but there is a heaviness that he feels. And he's not even talking of like New York City. He's talking about Vermont. The land of Ben and Jerry's, you know. Yeah, it's like people just carry this weight all around them. You know, but in Thailand, you know, comparatively, everything is way harder to accomplish. Bureaucracy is terribly frustrating. Infrastructure is nothing close to here. People are light-hearted. You know, land of 10,000 smiles. Every 2 years, they have a political coup. So I don't envy them for those other reasons. But my friend's point is, despite all of that, people don't carry around this weight. So they can do Tonglen without, you know, the side effects that I fear in our, basically, this Messiah complex and the image of the suffering Christ, it's a very powerful image. If that form of spirituality speaks to you, it can be truly transformative. Like His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, he says, you know, when I see like the actual fruits of like love and compassion, one time he said, I see it even more among my Christian brothers and sisters. He said that. So I'm not criticizing, okay, the suffering Christ, but I am saying that that image can also be misapplied, mixed up with Tonglen, and then a lot of side effects. So just be careful. So first, train in loving kindness, Maitri, recognizing kindness, recognizing love. Be bathed in a complete, kind of like immersion pool of love. Then train in compassion. Then train in taking and giving. Have to do it in a more progressive way. Not immediately jump in and say, oh, let me take your suffering. that it's like, that Messiah complex, that I need to save the world. If I don't do it, the world will fall apart.
There's another question now, Dr. Lai.
Mm-hmm.
It says, I didn't understand the difference between karuna and compassion. Can you explain more, please?
Sure. Again, if we follow compassion, it means to suffer with. No, don't suffer with. Karuna is recognizing the suffering, and then I want to be free from this suffering. I want to be free from this suffering. And I want you to be free from suffering. So karuna, is first to be practiced again, like we started the whole evening, as an act of self-care. Like I wish karuna upon myself as a starting point. I don't want suffering anymore. So then I want to relinquish the causes of suffering. That is practicing karuna. These days, you have this coined, the expression is coined self-compassion, right? Yeah. Because the actual word of like compassion, it cannot be applied to yourself. To suffer with is always to suffer with someone. So actually, if you want to be exact about that, self-compassion is actually an attempt to use English words, I think, to communicate some of the insights of karuna, which is first you have to see your own suffering and resolve, I don't want this. I don't need this. So I will let go of the causes of suffering. Concrete example, during the big tsunami 10, 15 years ago that happened in Southeast Asia, thousands and thousands of people were killed. I was in a retreat, in the midst of a retreat. It happened on Christmas Eve. I was in the midst of a retreat. And of course, the word came and we heard the news. And everybody was so affected by it. Then during the next day, when we were doing some practice at the retreat led by the Lama, the teacher said to us, one of the things he said to us is like, you have to remember that right now, of course, it is quite normal that you are feeling down and you're feeling the pain of this loss, even the people that you don't know, but the magnitude of that, you can just imagine the tremendous suffering that is going on. And then he said, but no amount of you feeling miserable, feeling the pain, is going to do anything to make it less painful for the people who are suffering now. He says, so this is not karuna. This is emotionalism and getting caught up and also making it about you when it's not about you. So there's a fine line, you know, when we suffer with someone else. Are we trying to, like, you know, make it about me? I'm not saying you're egotistical. I'm just saying that it's unskillful, according to the Buddha, to try to take suffering in that way. So when we say, I'm willing to take, like Donglen, your suffering, it doesn't mean, you know, like I'll make your suffering my problem. The weight of this training is not let me suffer, but rather let you be free from suffering. It seems like a fine difference, but it's an important difference. Otherwise, when you take, it can become very heavy very quickly. And that's not the purpose of this training.
Thank you. It is clear to the person now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good.
Dr. Lai?
Yes.
For myself, this lecture tonight, discussion has to be seen again. To me, there are dozens of points that you've made in tonight's discussion,
Mm-hmm.
each one of which could be subject for conversation.
Yes.
Exploration. I mean, it's really packed full of stuff. So of the many things that you touched on, it's sort of hard to pick one thing that really stands out for me. But to pick one, I think in terms of what you're talking about, compassion with the things happening now, whether it's the virus or whether it's demonstrations,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's so important to realize that so much of what we see, we are being led around and inflamed and distracted. On the other hand, there is
by our in the Buddhist context, we say by our projections.
Yes, and we are doing no good whatsoever with the emotional venting that is happening. It is like a big distraction, and it's a bad movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a movie I want to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of the reality and the unreality of it all, yes, we need to have compassion, but it is a movie.
Mm-hmm.
None of it is. We are doing no good with what we see as people's reactions.
The next step, if you ask me, I think the next step of to do or not to do, I think that's really hard to say for me.
Yes, and what can you do that will really make a difference?
Oh, that I you know, not my conversation to get into, or at least not here to get into.
Yes.
From the Lojong part, it's about training your own mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's about training your own mind.
I'm going to watch.
Then,
I'm going to watch
you know,
session over and over.
Then you train. You train your own mind. Then, whether you're going to yell or scream, that's a different matter.
Right.
Or you're going to walk serenely, that's a different matter.
Part of the problem is our own concepts of what is real and what is not. And what's been very important for me recently is to understand that a lot of what we categorize as being unreal doesn't match our concept. Our minds have no substantiality, yet what happens in the mind is very important. And the similarity between the mind and the rest of the universe is very important, because on the one hand, our concept of real is one thing and what's unreal is something else, but reality is not like that.
Therefore,
Therefore, our concepts on how we act are mistaken. We are acting as though these events are real, and we're discounting things that by our convention.
Well, real enough so that you step out on a busy street, suddenly you will get hit, you know?
Correct, correct.
So karma, yeah, so this unreal, again, I want to emphasize, doesn't mean, as in the other class that you are part of, I know, we say, you know, Kyobaji Densungben says, because when we say, just because we say relative reality is illusory, it doesn't mean that there are no consequences.
Yes.
And so consequences are important to pay attention to.
And one has to act.
And one has to act, yes.
Yes.
And act skillfully.
Yes.
Yeah. So you have to act skillfully.
Mm-hmm.
So the ability to see that it's illusory should not then say, therefore, the best thing to do is to lock yourself up in a room.
Right. One still has to act.
Yeah, because if you're going to lock yourself up in a room, that would include not eating and not pooping.
Right.
I mean, you have to carry it all the way.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So it's complicated, you know.
Right.
And maybe I will just be honest to say I'm not brave enough to open that box to want to talk about that.
Yeah.
Right. Of course, tonight also we don't have time. But I also want to point very clearly, you know, like to say that it is illusory doesn't mean that there are no consequences in the illusory world that we are in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's important to remember that.
Yep. Yes. Which is the contradiction, which is so interesting.
Yeah, not contradiction, but it's this, I like to call this, like, you know, this creative tension.
Mm-hmm.
Because life is paradoxical.
Yeah. That's a better word. That's a better word. Paradoxical.
Yeah. And so to kind of hold the paradox together.
Mm-hmm.
Because you see, if wisdom is taken to the wrong direction, it seems to render compassion as pointless. Compassion, if taken in the wrong direction, would render wisdom useless. Right? Wisdom says nothing happens. If we take that in the wrong direction, it makes compassion a waste of effort. Compassion or karuna taken in the wrong direction, then wisdom cannot do anything. Then the more karuna, the more suffering. So like the idea, right? Think that you are one with all beings everywhere, right? I think you've heard of that. Think that you are one with everything. In the Theravada tradition, Theravada Buddhism, you rarely will hear such a statement. Because from a Theravada perspective, and I think this is an important perspective for us to appreciate, when you think that you are one with everything, and since everything right now in confused existence entails suffering, now suddenly you're not only stuck with your own suffering, you have suddenly picked up the suffering of everybody else. And what's the purpose of that? So when Mahayana teachings say there is no difference between you and other, it is to be understood in the context of karuna. It is to be understood in the context of, if you don't want suffering, understand that nobody else wants suffering. If you want happiness, understand that everybody else wants happiness. In that sense, you are one with everything. So the Buddhist goal, actually, you know, the bumper sticker, all one. I mean, of course, it could mean a lot of things, you know, but not to be taken literally that you are one with everything. If you're one with everything, gosh, you know, as you're cutting up your broccoli in your vegan diet, it will be like, ouch, 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 ouch. So karuna is not, you know, talking about. And even in Tonglen, you know, when it says you take on the suffering of others, it is not like take on the suffering of others and, oh, suffer, suffer. No. It's talking about developing that courage, that willingness to do what? Let's reduce it down to something very real. And this is when I can test myself and say, how much karuna do I have? You know, when I apply this litmus test to how much karuna I have, I know I have very little karuna. I'm not being humble. I'm being very honest now. This is the most practical litmus test of how much karuna do I have? You know what is the question you should ask if you want to know? How willing am I to be inconvenienced? That's it. Forget about, you know, one with everything. I'm taking on the suffering, you know. How willing am I to be inconvenienced?
But doesn't this also get back to this idea of interdependence? When we're seeing the suffering of someone else, it's most likely someone we're in relationship to.
Not necessarily. Like the tsunami, you know.
Well, the tsunami, but on personal levels, if you're going to do Tonglen, it's someone you know.
No. Tonglen is just you start with someone you know and you extend to all beings everywhere.
But it still seems to me that it gets back to this idea of interdependence, because our suffering, or the suffering of others, is a perception that we have.
Yes.
And
that's a separate, that is implied, but it's not in the forefront of what you're doing when you do Tonglen meditation.
But seeing it as illusory.
Yes, seeing it as illusory
is perception too.
Helps to develop courage to take. Helps to stretch the muscle of being willing to be inconvenienced.
Right. Because otherwise we couldn't do it. Not for long.
Yes, not for long. So that very annoying person, I don't want to be inconvenienced. There I can see, you know, how much karuna I have. No, really.
Yeah.
You want to know how much karuna you have? Just see, you know, how willing are you to be inconvenienced? So Chogyam Trungpa, one of the earliest Tibetan Buddhist teachers in the West, that made Buddhism very known in the West, he said the essence of the Bodhisattva vow is giving up privacy. Tell that to an American. All senses of giving up privacy. Or he would say privacy. His English is from England. By that, essentially what he means is you can no longer say, you know, oh, and right now is my personal time. Oh, I don't want to be inconvenienced. So my expression would be, you know, how willing am I to be inconvenienced is the best way I can see how well my training in Karuna is going. Some days better than others. Most days pretty miserable.
I have a question if there's time.
Yeah.
Question. Oh yeah. If there's not time, that's fine. We could.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. You have started. And
there's
people are free to leave. So.
Okay. Good. Thanks. You know, when I'm in the practicing of the absolute bodhicitta, there are times when I feel like I get a glimpse of, you know, having this different relationship with difficulties that I have. And there's this great relief. And they're still there, but there's nobody to experience them. And they're not that bad. They're just there.
Yes.
It's almost, it kind of reminds me of when I, you know, had dental work done and took, you know, laughing gas. And it's kind of like, this hurts like hell, but I don't care. But there's a kind of a similar sense.
Yes.
But I have control over it some. And what I'm kind of wondering about with this karuna is, you know, it's not just taking in the suffering of others, the painful part of it. It's really wishing for them to have
to be free.
To have that kind of attitude. Yes, to be free of the suffering of suffering.
Right. And as you just said, and that's an important point, and wishing for them to also have the circumstance of that kind of experience.
Yeah. Yes.
You are not here to be a messiah to take away their pain, which is in any case not possible. But you are wishing for them to also have the circumstance of seeing and understanding this. So then we also develop patience, you know, for other people that we can see maybe sometimes so clearly. You are creating suffering for yourself, but we learn not to yell at them. You know, we learn not to yell at them. We say, yeah, I understand. I understand it's really hard. But there is no other way. And so how can I help you understand that as well? That there's no other way. That suffering arises from ourselves and it has to end with ourselves.
Thank you.
Yeah. So tonight we end here. The goal is always to try to end at 9, but then of course, if we have questions, I will keep taking them. So the rest of you, you know, like if you can stay till 9, you know, you have fulfilled the contract. Then you can watch the last half an hour. If you're curious what happened, you know, you can go back and watch the video that we post, or come back to Facebook and watch it, okay? So as I always say, you know, we don't want, you know, your interest in Dharma to become a point of contention for the people and the pets that you have around you. They might resent, you know. So all of us, you know, some of us have people, some of us have pets, some of us have only pets and not people, some of us have both, you know. So let's not make the people and the pets, you know, resentful or jealous. more than necessary. So now we dedicated the merit, and then, we will come back next week. Yeah. Then mostly I will say, don't think too much about this. Apply. Start meditating. Start remembering kindness. Don't worry too much about what if, this, that. That's all, Just concepts. Those are concepts. Of course, meditating on love and compassion, also concept. But some concepts lead to entanglements with more concepts. And some concepts, which the Buddha taught, puts an end to concepts. We need to know the difference. Changchu Semchu Rinpoche Ma Kye Pa Nam Kye Gyurji Kye Pa Nyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gong Ne Gong Tu Pure Sure. Okay.
Thank you.
Ta.
Ta.